Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our virtual event with YA speculative fiction author Devon Taylor. He was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, and currently lives in Pennsylvania with his wife and 2 daughters. His day job consists of sneaking around the house with ninja-like stealth to avoid waking up his kids. When not writing, reading, or tediously typing out text messages with all the correct spelling and punctuation, he spends his time with his family. He is the author of Dagger Hill, which just came out today, and The Soul Keepers duology. So, Devon, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really excited to be able to do this with you.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me.
And for those who do not know, Devon is a great fan and friend of the store, just as we are of him, and has made multiple appearances in the past for our in-person events, including with the Young Creatives. So we're just really excited to continue to have his support and to also support him as he publishes his 3rd book, Lucky Number 3. So to jump right into Dagger Hill, how would you pitch your book to potential readers?
So Dagger Hill is it's kind of a horror thriller, psychological kind of book. This is the worst elevator pitch in history. It's very Stranger Things-esque. It's set in 1989, and it focuses on 4 teenagers who are about to graduate high school, and they spend most of their days hanging out on the local hill, known as Dagger Hill. And right at the very beginning of their last summer together, they're up on the hill, and a plane crashes right on top of them. And in the midst of all the chaos, one of them goes missing. And from there, it spirals into a bunch of... The book is, if nothing else, a love letter to the horror genre. So there's a monster, and there's a menace, and there's government conspiracies, and there's lots of 80s and early 90s nostalgia, and it's just a kind of a wild ride from there. But it gets creepy and dark and cool.
So following up on that, because I know you teased me a little bit with this book a couple years ago when you were first writing it. How deep does the Stranger Things inspiration go? Or similarities, not inspiration, similarities.
Pretty much the main similarities are that it's set in the 80s and that it focuses on 4 teenagers. From there, it's a totally different story. There's no parallel universes. There's no... it's not as deep 80s as Stranger Things is, because that's more like mid-80s, where this is like the end of the 80s, which is ridiculous because I was born in 1990. So I had to research literally everything for just the year before I was born, when I could have said it a little bit later and known pretty much everything. But otherwise, yeah, it's its own thing. There is a monster. Other than that, it's a lot of like psychological weirdness, more so than the creepy jump scare stuff that Stranger Things is.
Very cool. Which actually leads very nicely into my next question, because I was born in 1989, and I think it's a super cool year to research. So what was it like writing your first book set before you were born, and what was the research process like?
It was tedious. Because I'm very nitpicky about things being chronologically correct. And you having been born in 1989, not that you probably remember a lot of 1989, but...
I definitely don't remember any. I was only alive for 3 months of it.
But still, people harbor a certain attachment to the year that they were born, and they like to know those fun little facts. So, like anytime I mentioned a song, I had to go back and make sure that I knew exactly what month it came out and exactly what kind of radio station it might have been playing on and when it might have even been playing on the radio, so that hopefully anyone who was alive and remembers 1989 will appreciate the fact that it lines up pretty closely.
So that being said, what was your favorite 1989 song that you included?
Oh, gosh. The one... I think the one reference that I made that still exists in the book, because I know that I cut a lot of stuff out that ended up being extraneous, but the one I think I mentioned "Bat Dance" by Prince at least once, and that song is totally ridiculous. So
it's very 80s, so in keeping with the world building of 1989.
right. Yeah, it was, and I was looking. Yeah, some songs I didn't even know. Like I needed a specific song for a certain moment, and I would go through and just look up the top songs from 1989 and the top like rock songs or the top pop songs, and I spent a lot of time listening to 80s songs.
Well, a lot of authors are now putting together Spotify lists that go, with your books. Is that something you would ever consider doing? For the ones that got cut, especially.
I would totally do that. I actually did. I know that there is a Spotify playlist for my first book, The Soul Keepers, that I made is like, trying to amp up, the knowledge that the book even exists. But I would totally go through and make like an 80s playlist for this one. I'm sure that would be super fun to listen to.
Oh, that would be awesome. And then we can put it in the links for this and for the book.
Yeah, I'm on it.
Awesome. Very cool. So one of the things that I really love about your books is they all kind of have this feeling of walking the line between the living and the dead. And what is it that draws you, to that kind of turning point in life? I don't know. Can it be a turning point in life if it's post-life in the Soul Keepers? But I like the ambiguity of the someone's missing and we don't know, really if they're alive or gone.
That's a deep question. I don't know what it is specifically. I've always kind of been drawn to stories that focus on someone being pulled out of their natural existence. You know what I mean? Their routine life gets totally thrown off, and they're thrown into either a totally different world or a different situation, and it's something that is pretty deep and dark, and I like the idea of someone being really, really far gone and then being kind of pulled back from that by the people that care about them. So like in the Soul Keepers duology, there was a lot of that, like not necessarily redemption. There was a lot of redemption, but the sense that you're not alone in the universe, even when you're detached that far from life as you know it. The people that care about you will come for you and find you and hopefully save you in the end.
Oh, absolutely. It's something that I feel like it gets into the the YA thriller and mystery aspect of things, but it's more of a, I don't know, I like that yours have more of a philosophical kind of feel to them, in a certain regard about that. Because it also, obviously adds conflict and great plot, which is helpful too. But I really enjoy, exploring the greater mysteries of life through mythology and through, giant plane crash. So both of them.
Exactly right. I mean, and there's always that turning point too, especially for kids in high school when they're right on the cusp of graduating and they're about to sort of step off the cliff into full-on adulthood and quote-unquote the real world, even though I still don't feel like an adult and I don't feel like I live in the real world all the time. But, it's that juxtaposed with the plane crash and the monster and the government conspiracies that really make you think about life.
Yeah, absolutely. So where going a little deeper into that. So where did the idea for Dagger Hill come from? And is the Pennsylvania town based on any Pennsylvania towns that you have lived in or have been to?
Oh, I'm so glad that you asked that question. Because any good Pennsylvanian, especially like Lehigh Valley or the surrounding area, northeastern Pennsylvania specifically, will recognize that Windale, which is the town in Dagger Hill, is like an amalgamation of many small Pennsylvania towns.
It was like reading about home. It was great.
Yeah.
Minus the giant plane crashes and, but it was like reading about home.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I stole a lot of sort of landmarks from small Pennsylvania towns and the things that you really recognize as Pennsylvania. I grew up in Vegas, and when I moved here, I was a sophomore in high school, and it was total culture shock. And now that I've been here for like 15 years, I consider myself a dual citizen, and I recognize those things that are very specific to Pennsylvania that I wanted to include.
Awesome. So did the idea for Dagger Hill with the plot come first or the setting?
I think it was actually the setting, because this is really the kind of book that I've always wanted to write, that I never thought that I had the chops to write. The small town with the big cast of characters and the deep-rooted, not secrets necessarily, but ties to each other, and everybody kind of knows everybody. It's a very Stephen King-esque kind of thing that I obviously love immensely, and I never thought that I could pull it off at all, but I'm pretty proud of what I got from it. So the town itself was really where it started, and then it grew from there.
And I would say you did. I've enjoyed reading your work for years, so I'm a little biased.
I appreciate that.
But I really enjoyed this one, and definitely had a lot of those feelings that, like, I am new to reading horror. It is not something that I have ever really embraced before and have gotten to enjoy more. So I was really excited to read this one. Obviously, with your previous books, you were able to have events at the store and play D&D with our young writers. What has been different about this book coming out for you during the pandemic? And as a follow-up, what game would be most fun to play with your readers of this book?
Ooh, those are good questions. I definitely miss the idea that you can kind of go to a store and talk to people in person, and I mean, I'm lucky enough that I've made connections with bookstores around here, especially you guys. But this book was a little bit different overall, because when I wrote my first two books, I was a stay-at-home dad, and right before I started writing this book, I went back to work at a day job. I actually have a pretty sweet gig. I work at a very well-known guitar manufacturer in Nazareth, PA.
Oh, that's awesome.
That well-known guitar manufacturer in Nazareth, PA. So I basically get to hang out and play guitar all day, which is super cool on its own. But I started that job, and right after I started that job, I started writing this book. So the whole process of writing it and then promoting it and trying to get the knowledge that the book exists out in the world and sort of gain that word of mouth has been a lot harder, because I'm working around a different schedule. But and then somewhere in the middle there, we had a lockdown. We were all quarantined, and they gave me plenty of time to write, but I didn't know what was even going to happen. So it was kind of like someone hit pause, and then we picked everything back up again, and we weren't really sure where to go from there. So we're kind of figuring things out as we go, and stuff like this is super fun, and you guys are getting creative with how you do your events, and everyone else is finding different ways. So it's just a learning process for everybody.
Absolutely. So then, what game would you want to play with the Dagger Hill readers? Would you want to go for more of a role-playing game, or more of, life, or life is boring, not life, but Cards Against Humanity? I don't know.
I mean, readers of the book, There's a lot of Blockbuster video reference in there. There's a big chunk because there's a video store in the book, and I basically poked fun at the fact that Blockbuster was this huge thing through the 90s and that it was supposed to be this impenetrable, indestructible force of nature, and now there are none left. And I've seen actually in different stores that there's a Blockbuster board game that you can play. It's like a trivia game, and
Oh, cool.
that would be the game that I'd probably play.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was a thing. I actually found my old Blockbuster card when I was going through an old bag, and I was like, I'm never getting rid of this. And then realized that most YA readers today probably never got one.
No, right.
They probably definitely know about Blockbuster because of, there's enough 90s and 80s kid nostalgia for it, but they probably never got their own cards. So
yeah,
you can
the
show them off.
Blockbuster game comes in one of those bulky white plastic VHS containers.
Oh, sweet.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool. And the kids who are going to read this book aren't going to know anything about that, but they're like, what is this? Why is it so big and thick? It's not, I don't have a device that functions with this, but yeah.
My stepdad is a huge movie buff, and he has a giant old TV that has a VHS so that he can still watch all of his giant blocky VHS players. Awesome. So I think my 18-year-old stepbrother is the only 18-year-old who knows what the function of those are.
That's awesome.
If there are other 18-year-olds listening who know, I am sorry, and please do call me out if you do know what the blocky VHS white cases look like, because I would be happy to know.
Yeah, right.
Happy to know that you know. So obviously the central focus of the book is these four friends and their relationship with each other. What of the relationships was your favorite to write? And if you didn't have a particular favorite, what was, one of the coolest scenes between some of the characters that you liked?
I was really happy with the thing that came immediately after the town when it came to writing the book was the relationship between these four characters. And Gabe and Charlie and Sonia and Kimberly are the teenagers, and Gabe and Charlie actually were transplanted from a book that I started writing like years and years and years ago. It was not a similar kind of story, but it was the same sort of vibe. It was supposed to be a small town. It was the book that I always wanted to write that I tried to write and failed. So I took them, and then I added Sonia and Kimberly, and they just like immediately. It's such a weird thing when writers talk about the characters and like how they're their own people in their heads, but this was the first time that I felt that like they took on a life of their own, and the four of them just gelled immediately, and I could feel that history with them. And so I don't know that I have a favorite relationship. The one that I probably relate to the most is between Gabe and Charlie, because they're best friends, and me and my own brother are that way. The relationship between Gabe and Charlie is modeled after the relationship that I have with my own brother, who the book is actually dedicated to. And so that's probably the one that I relate to the most, and the one that I sort of treasure the most.
Awesome. I've definitely written me and my sister into a couple stories and things like that, and some of them are flattering to her, others I'm sure not so much. So hopefully your brother is very pleased if you dedicated it to him with how it all worked out. I
hope so. Yeah, we'll see.
Well, that ties into my next question of, are there any of the characters in the book similar to you as a kid or any of your friends and family? So if there are others, if you would like to expand, if not, we'll go with it's you and your brother.
Yeah, no, I mean, Gabe, I don't think that I was really like Gabe so much. I mean, Charlie's character is probably more of like a Charlie is me and my brother kind of at the same time. Gabe is the guy that we always, kind of wanted to be, but didn't quite get there. So, yeah, I would say that that he's probably the closest to me. And then I modeled a lot of like the parents in the book after, my own parents, my mom and my stepdad, who are, super supportive and, are always kind of there to have my back. But otherwise, I don't think there were any other relationships from real life that I put in the book. At least I hope not.
Well, that leads me to my next one, which is obviously with your first book, the first person reading it, wasn't an editor or an agent. But now this is your third book. So who was your original first reader, and are they still your first reader?
My wife is always going to be my first reader. And even if she's not necessarily reading the book as I'm churning it out, like she's my go-to soundboard for ideas, and I bounce everything off of her, and she's the yin to my yang, I guess, which is so cheesy, but I'm able to kind of have that dialogue with her, and she always just kind of like, this doesn't make any sense, and I'm like, you know what, you're right.
It is always helpful to have someone to bounce ideas off of. I know that
she was very patient with this one. She lived with me because I essentially wrote this book twice. The first draft was, dare I say, terrible. And then when I had to go back through and sort of piece it back together, she was really beneficial in helping me figure that out.
So I know this question you've answered in person a couple times, but now we'll have it recorded for posterity's sake.
Right, forever.
What's the biggest advice you received, as a young writer, and what advice would you give to other young writers?
I had a lot of I had one very specific creative writing teacher in high school who was really a big supporter of me and my writing, and she actually showed up to one of the events for my very first book coming out, and that was like a huge emotional moment for me. But a lot of what I learned about writing came from watching interviews with other authors online, and just reading in general. Reading books about writing by the writers that I liked. Everybody recommends it all the time, but Stephen King's book on writing is like major in terms of
the book.
Yes, absolutely. Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott was another good one. So it's like those kinds of, I sought out that information on my own. Like it was an obsession almost, where I was always just kind of seeking out, listening to other writers talk about writing, or reading other writers talk about writing, and reading their stuff, and following those paths to different books and different writers, and sort of dipping my toes in whichever genres I thought were interesting and thought could benefit me the most. So I mean, the two biggest pieces of advice that I always give, I've just whittled it down to write a lot and read a lot, and not necessarily in that order. Read a lot first, and then try to write, and then when you write a bunch of garbage, read some more, and then go back and try to write again, because it's never going to be perfect the first time, and you just have to accept that, and you have to be open to adapting and learning from your own mistakes.
Yeah, there's definitely been times where I've offered different advice to people over the years, as far as, they're like, oh, well, how do I be a writer? And I'm like, well, I'm not a published writer, so I'm not the one you want to listen to. But I do know that you can't edit a blank page. And,
Correct.
the quickest way to be a writer is to write. So definitely read a lot and write a lot are important.
And I hesitated for a long time. I never called myself a writer, even though I was writing. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned too late was that if you're writing, then you're a writer. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're published. It doesn't matter if you plan to be published. You can call yourself a writer as long as you're writing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So all of you writing, keep writing. You are writers.
For sure.
What would you say has been your biggest silver lining of the past year and a half? It's not really book related, but I'm curious.
No, it's a good question. It was a wild year and a half, but we were really lucky in the sense that during the actual really hardcore lockdown quarantine part of everything, my wife and I were both getting paid, and we were staying at home, and a lot of people had really, 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 really tough situations that they had to deal with, and some people had real nightmare scenarios on their hands. But we considered ourselves immensely fortunate that we kind of didn't have to worry about anything. And so it was the biggest silver lining for me was during that 3 to 4 month period last year when we were really not going anywhere and everyone was really locked down, staying at home as much as they could. And both of our jobs were shut down, was that we just kind of got a break, and we got to spend some time with our kids, and we just hung out and played games, and we tried to make the most out of every day. We did all the stuff that parents fantasize about doing with their kids that they don't always get the chance to do because there's no time, or there's a lot of work, or there's other stuff that has to be done, and we just did all of that, and it was kind of a great time, actually. Oh, I hear a cat.
I was gonna say she has to say hi. So hello internet. This is Arya Stark. Hello. She lives up to her name. She keeps coming in and she's like, "You're talking, but I don't hear who you're talking to. What's going on?" So she's my fur baby, but definitely not the same as having real children during a pandemic. Definitely not the same.
In the pandemic was quite a lot, but the youngest had a birthday in the middle of that, and even though we were stuck at home, we just made the most out of every second of it, and she had a blast, and we had a blast, and it was just oddly nice.
Yeah. No, it's good to hear positive stories too. Definitely. So we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but pandemic life, more or less time to sit down and write, and how did it affect your writing routine? If you had a routine beforehand.
Well, my routine was kind of shot when I started my new job, because I used to get up really early in the morning. And I have to get up really early in the morning now, but it's to go to work. I used to get up really early in the morning to write, so that part of my day was already done before the kids got up, and I got into being the stay-at-home dad part of my job. Being home during a pandemic was interesting because we were also dealing with the last half of first grade with our oldest in the middle of that. So it was, I would say I probably had less time to write while she was still finishing up school. There were a lot of late nights sitting up writing, trying to get my deadline met, which I didn't do, I don't think, even a single time. Sorry. To those who know that I'm apologizing to him. But yeah, when she finished school and it was just kind of like the summer and we were just hanging out, I had a lot more time. Even when we were just hanging out, I was able to just kind of sit and bang out some stuff if I needed to. So that gave me a little bit more time, but I would say less time overall.
So next question is about your fellow authors. So I, was really excited to have you as part of a panel at the store in person, and this is also slightly research. But who would your dream author panel, YA author fellow panelists be? With the caveat, everyone, that I am putting him on the spot. So if he doesn't mention you, it's my fault.
Yeah, good gravy. There are a ton. I'm lucky enough to be part of a group of authors who are all published by the same imprint that publishes my books. And we're a pretty tight-knit group, and some of us have done events together, and some of us have done panels together and things like that. A couple of us were at Keystone Comic-Con in Philly when my first book came out, and that was super fun. Shout out to Ellie Delano and Shani Petrov. So I would gladly any day do a panel with any one of them again. But if I had to extend outside of that realm to literally anybody. Oh, that's so hard. Victoria Schwab would be one of them. She's badass all the way through. Or V.E. Schwab, depending on which books we're referring to. Jay Kristoff is pretty badass too. He's super cool. Jay Kristoff's partner in crime, Amy Kaufman, is pretty good too. She's super fun. A lot of people too. I'm basing this off of like the people that I follow on social media and whose personalities I relate to the most on there, and who always have the best things to say about writing and things like that. Good gravy. Victoria Aviar would be fun too. The Red Queen series was fantabulous. There's so many.
There are.
That would probably be my. I'd say that's probably like my top 4 right there. If I could pick any of them right off the top of my head.
Well, I think we've pitched for almost all of them on the grid, so
really?
Maybe if we get lucky, I'll be like, "Hey, Devon, come be an in-combo partner for these people." If selfishly I don't want to do it myself.
I'm there any second. Just give me a call.
But speaking of social media, and then I promise I will get back to book questions. But YA social media has obviously garnered, a lot of attention in the last couple of years, and people have said, there's wonderful ideas, there's great ideas. How would you describe the, as a YA author, the social media scene, both the great interactions with fans to the maybe this wasn't so happy part?
To the sketchier, more dramatic side of things.
Yeah.
Social media kind of scares the hell out of me in general. And anybody who knows me knows that the last year and a half, especially, I've pulled back from it a lot. Specifically because of the sketchier, more dramatic side of things. I really, especially, and I think a lot of authors relate to this, but especially as someone who spends a lot of time alone in a room talking to the people that live in my head, it's really hard to put yourself on a platform and not necessarily play pretend, but to put on the, look at me kind of face and say, here's this thing that I did, and I need you all to look at me and pay attention to it, and hopefully throw some money at it so that I can keep doing this thing. And like, there's no good way to do that without feeling kind of slimy. And that's the hardest part, I think, is that a lot of the publishing stuff, marketing wise, kind of falls on the author. And a lot of it then leads you back to social media, because in order to gain attention, you have to gain followers, and in order to gain followers, you have to gain attention. And it's kind of a vicious cycle. And so I think some people will turn to putting whatever the first hot take is that they have on something on their social media platform, and it's a risk every time. Whatever you say is going to make somebody mad at some point. And it just depends on how many of those people decide to say something or not, I guess, And I think there are a lot of people who are right, and there are a lot of people who are wrong, depending on your viewpoint. But it's just a stage, and you're going to do stuff, and sometimes you're going to get applause, and sometimes you're going to get tomatoes thrown at you. And it's just, I don't know, it's hard to navigate, and I don't think there's any right answer, but I definitely have pulled back from it, because it's like, you never know what thing you're going to say or do that's going to rile up some kind of mob, and then you don't know where you're going to be. But
yeah, mob free. We'll try to stay mob free.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting into the thick of it is just, I'm generally a non-confrontational person anyway, so when I see a lot of confrontation happening on social media, I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna take a hard pass on this and do something else instead.
Yeah. Well, we'll promote you on social media.
I appreciate it. Yeah, that would certainly, be appreciated. But
yeah. So I know I would never ask you to choose which of your daughters is your favorite, but I am going to ask you, did you have more fun with 1980s nostalgia thrillers or with mythology inspired quests?
It's not quite asking me to pick a favorite child, but it's close. I think, honestly, as long and hard as it was to work on Dagger Hill, I really enjoyed writing that book a lot. And I think a lot of the response to it has been really nice. Like, a lot of the people who have read my previous books and then read this one, I've had a lot of nice things to say about my growth as a writer, and seeing a side of me that they didn't see with the Soul Keeper's duology, and really sort of coming into my own style a little bit. So I don't know that any book is my favorite, but I will say that the one that was the most fun to write so far has been Dagger Hill.
So I have just a few more questions. So if anyone wants to chime in the chat, please feel free to do so now. My next question, though, is on the cover art, because you have had some wonderful covers for all three of your books. And I'm just curious what, if any, because I know it varies, input you had into the design for this one.
Basically what happens is I get asked for my opinion very early on after I submit the book and things are rolling and production is happening. They kind of ask me what I would like to see on the cover. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to see any of that. But generally speaking, the designers of the covers at Macmillan are awesome. And then the first two books, The Soul Keepers and The Ghost Seekers, the illustrations were done by Kevin Tong, and he blew it out of the water, literally, with his cover art, and it was amazing, and I couldn't have asked for anything better. And then they got Heather Vaughn, who is actually a Philadelphia-based artist, to do the cover for Dagger Hill, and she just like knocked it out of the park. With the Thousand Leggers, which are a big part of the book, and just the whole thing was just phenomenal, and she totally did an amazing job with it. And so I honestly, like, my little tidbit of this is what I would like to see will never compare to the actual amazingness that I get as a final result. So I just end up drooling every time. So my opinion really doesn't matter.
Well, I have to say, as the one who does all the graphic design for our, for our promotion and everything, it's always exciting for me to see a really cool cover, and especially something, as dynamic as this one, because it gives me a lot of things that I can do with it, to help it make it, pop even more. So I really loved it as well.
The color scheme on it was super cool, and it's very, 80s vibe with the bright colors. And I honestly, the one thing that I did say that I kind of wanted to see was like some kind of black and yellow on there. Not necessarily because I'm a Steelers fan, but because I like that, that color scheme, and they were able to do that. So, I got that one little thing that I wanted. Now that made me happy.
You got a Philadelphia artist to do black and yellow. Jeez Louise, you have magical powers.
Apparently, yeah. Maybe she's not an Eagles fan. I don't know.
Oh my. Okay, so I had. Okay, so last two. What have you read recently, or are currently reading?